Welcome back to BadgerBlitz TV, your Rivals.com destination for all things Wisconsin athletics. I'm Matt Perkins, joined as always by BadgerBlitz.com publisher and editor-in-chief John McNamara. Great to see you as always, buddy.
Good to see you too, Matt.
So there's big news around the Wisconsin football program as we record here Wednesday morning. Yesterday it dropped that general manager Maximus Steinecker is headed to USC to reunite with Chad Bowden and that recruiting player personnel staff. Looks like he's going to be director of player personnel over at USC. And John, I have my thoughts here, but I think all signs point to this not being, well, a great sign for the Badgers, considering his prominent role in the recruiting department and his relationships with recruits and current players on the team.
Yeah, it's a significant blow. Obviously, coming off two difficult seasons, I think one thing that fans who are optimistic always pointed to was Max and Pat and the recruiting department and the strength that Wisconsin seemed to have there. And now you can argue that that's the most critical piece of that team is now going to USC. He was now going to be the general manager, which makes it a little bit more interesting. I thought that maybe he would want to, get into that job, see what it looked like, go a year or two in that role. Because I don't know how much higher you can get in the off-field coaching role than a general manager. Obviously, this stuff is still very new, so it's a little bit of a surprise to me that the timing of it, but. Look, I would imagine that USC offered, a really fertile recruiting ground, more money, more NIL, more everything, for him to make that jump. Obviously a guy that's super young, 24 years old. You've had Clint Cosgrove come on your show, come on our boards, talk about just what he thinks about him. And, I got to know Max a little bit during his time at Wisconsin. I don't know that there's a lot of people in the world of college football with a brighter future. So it's a big blow to Wisconsin. Now, with that being said, I don't want to make it seem like recruiting will just stop in Madison. I think they'll be able to find someone to replace him. Obviously, Luke Fickell has put an emphasis on recruiting and the importance of that department being strong. One name that was floated out there, I don't know if I'll say it right now because I don't want to look bad in a couple of weeks, but it was a very interesting name, a guy with ties to the state of Wisconsin. So we'll see. But it's, no matter how you look at it, it's a pretty significant blow to, Wisconsin's not only recruiting efforts, but just roster management efforts as well with the stuff that they tasked Max with doing.
What's different to me about this, as opposed to pretty much all of the on-field hiring changes over the last 2 years, is on the field guys were pretty much fired. Max is the first one to, I don't want, if you want to say step up but move out to a different job, maybe potentially a bigger job, but actually leave the program instead of being forced out. And that is a relatively significant development in my estimation. Does it mean that the sky is falling? No, but it's also not a great omen, like we talked about, just because of his relationships. Obviously, we imagine that Pat Lambert will be, taking up a lot of the slack, as he's already sort of, was effectively the 1B to Max's 1A in that department. I'm curious if they, I don't want to say like move Casey Robach, but at least in the interim have him go back to doing more of the recruiting stuff that he was in his initial role at UW before he became the assistant offensive line coach.
Yeah, good question. I don't know that you pull him away from that. He kind of had, I guess, if you go by what Luke Fickell talked about, he's still going to be involved in that recruiting, still going to be involved in the on-field coaching stuff. I think if we're going to get to this, if you look at the moves that they've made to really put almost 2 guys per position coach. So I don't know that you want to put Casey back in that recruiting role to put more on his plate there, but I certainly could be wrong. I think Casey's value might be more on field, although he's certainly had some success, obviously, in Wisconsin's recruiting efforts the last 2 cycles. Wisconsin landed 10 offensive linemen. He played a big role in that. So, you mentioned Pat Lambert. If there's Pat Lambert, I want to say his name correctly. If there is a guy in-house that could potentially be the new general manager, I don't think there's any doubt that it would be him. I think he's certainly qualified to do that. Now, will Luke Fickell go that route? That kind of remains to be seen. But for sure, they have a vacancy, and I think they'll bring in someone to add to this team. And how the titles kind of shift after that happens, I guess, kind of remains to be seen. But, Pat would certainly be the most logical pick if they want to elevate someone to that general manager title. And, he's, like you talked about, Matt, I think he has as much background and credentials and respect and is everything that goes into it as Max does. Max is just the young guy, so I think people get more excited about him because of the age and the potential in the future that he has. But Pat is just kind of lockstep with him, so he would certainly make a lot of sense in my eyes as well.
Definitely. Well, let's talk about some of those other coaches that they've brought on during this offseason. That's kind of one of the things that I wanted to do today here with you, John, and sort of get, sort of go over again quickly sort of who Wisconsin has added both on the field and as support staff, and sort of talk about, I don't want to say necessarily the pros and cons, but talk about what we think they're going to sort of bring to the program. Obviously, the biggest name is Jeff Grimes, the new offensive coordinator coming over from Kansas, previously at Baylor. Obviously going to be the most impactful hire from a scheme perspective and an influence perspective. John, I guess, what would you say if you were ranking his chances of having success? A, how would you define success on the field for him? And B, how much success do you think he can have in the first year in Madison?
Good question. You look at Jeff Grimes, I think it's tough to say like he will do this, he will do that. I think what he represents, though, is the right move, in my opinion. So whether that was Jeff Grimes or someone who brings a background and a philosophy like he does, I think that's the right move. I think that's something that Luke Fickell reflected on. I don't think anyone can argue that the Phil Longo experiment it wasn't the right fit. I don't think it's as much of a Phil Longo thing as it is fit at Wisconsin in what works well here, in what's in your own backyard, and et cetera, et cetera. So I do think Grimes brings what Wisconsin needs there. Now, success in year one, that's a good question. Now, you bring the schedule into that, and what the Wisconsin's record could be this year. All those things kind of factor in. I think optics are going to be a big thing here, and if fans can see a return to what has been successful at Wisconsin, and that is not going to be 3 yards in a cloud of dust. I do think, though, that it's going to be, that brand of physical football, running the ball, using the tight ends, getting away from that true hybrid spread, which they've been doing, and getting back to more of what fans are accustomed to seeing. So maybe it's not a numbers thing, maybe it's more of an optics thing. But look, I don't know. It's tough to say right now because you have that schedule looming, and I don't know how many games Wisconsin's going to win this year.
I think for me, a couple of the key metrics are going to be, one of them is going to be time of possession. I think a lot of the issues that we saw with Longo came to a lot of 3 and outs, a lot of quick drives that made the defense keep getting back on the field. So I am hopeful that Grimes' offense will be able to just hold on to the ball longer so the defense isn't out there for a million snaps every game. Secondly, for me, this has been my bugaboo forever. Less passes batted down at the line of scrimmage. That's a quarterback thing, but that's also a scheme thing. And I think if they can increase time of possession, reduce balls batted down at the line of scrimmage, that's those two, I don't want to say small things, but not massive things, could go a long way to having a much more productive offense in 2025, even if the final record is not as indicative of that. Yeah,
you talked about the batted passes. Obviously, Wisconsin had a little bit of that the last 2 seasons. And, Grimes got on the camp with, Jesse and Zach, and he talked about those batted balls and what a guy who's 6'3", 6'4" can do to alleviate that. And obviously, Wisconsin has that, I think in Billy Edwards Jr., a bigger guy who can get through some of those passing lanes. But you talked about too, Matt. I mean, it's also a scheme thing, and it's being comfortable there. It's certainly something that Grimes has talked about. And then you flip to it, you have Danny O'Neal, who kind of is the maybe sub 6 foot guy. And he talked about, he's just got a little bit of something that you can't maybe put your finger on what he brings to the table. So hopefully some of that stuff gets alleviated. But I think you bring up a really good point, Matt, is the flow and the time of possession. If that looks a little bit better, not these 3 and outs and rolling that defense back on the field after, it feels like they were out there 45 seconds earlier. So a lot that goes into it, but I do like where this could potentially go. I think Grimes brings what Wisconsin needs. Now, can they implement it? Remains to be seen.
Then Kenny Guyton, not new to the staff, but transitioning over to quarterbacks, which opens up Jordan Reed to come in from Western Michigan to take care of the receivers. I think those two moves sort of have to be talked about in tandem. Will this be an improvement? Do you think that Kenny Guyton can be an effective quarterback coach? We've seen him do some of that at Arkansas as well, but do you think that he can be an effective quarterback coach? And is Jordan Reed going to be able to continue the growth of at least some of that wide receiver room? Because we did see, big leaps from, a Vinny Anthony in his, third year in the program, and a couple other guys step up because they are losing a couple of their top producers and Will Pauling, Bryson Green, but they do get Anthony back. They do get Trech Kekahuna back. So I guess the combination of Guyton and Reed, what is the reason for hope with that sort of move, those two moves in conjunction?
Yeah, I like this move a lot because you have Grimes in place, right? So you have the person to oversee the unit, and that gives Guyton some time to really just focus on the quarterbacks and not have that play calling duty attached to it. And I think that, Grimes is going to sign off on everything that goes through that offense. Now, with that being said, I think it's going to be more of a team effort, which Wisconsin hasn't necessarily seen over the last 2 years on the offensive side of the ball in terms of collaboration. So I like this move in terms of Guyton's progression as a coach, right? So, plays the position, that quarterback position at Ohio State, begins then his coaching career as a wide receiver. Now he's back to quarterback. So he has that experience, doesn't necessarily have that coaching experience, but I think that he's a guy that's going to be able to go out and recruit. We've talked to some guys that he came out to not only visit, but, offer. A guy like Trey Taylor, really spoke highly of Kenny Guyton as a guy that got involved in his recruitment right away. They got him up for a visit. And I don't necessarily think they're going to get Trey Taylor because he's probably one of the more heavily recruited quarterbacks in that 27 class. But I think it kind of shows what Guyton can do at that position in terms of getting out there, recruiting, building those relationships, getting guys on campus and trying to get the staff to close on quarterbacks. But this works well to me because you have Grimes overseeing it. And it's going to allow Guyton to work under Grimes, but also probably more importantly, learn under Grimes. And, if you look down the road, Guyton could be a potential offensive coordinator candidate it's college football. It's tough to look a week down the road, let alone a season or two. But Grimes has a history of 2 years, 3 years, and I'm gone. Not to say that it won't happen or it will happen here, but I like this next step in Guyton's career as a future offensive coordinator. I certainly think Luke Fickell feels pretty strongly about that. Now, the other piece of that, Jordan Reed, young guy, comes from Western Michigan. I think there's certain position groups on the staff where you really want a guy to go out there and recruit hard, and I think they're going to give that to Jordan Reed. This 26 class is going to be really important. I think they need 3, probably 4 guys, so you're going to see what he's able to do on that recruiting front. I think he's taking over Guyton's board, and they're kind of working cohesively with guys like Zach Washington, but he's also used that month of January to go out and locate some of his targets, so he's going to be thrown in the fire right away recruiting-wise, and we're going to really get to see what he's able to do this summer to try to close on some of these 26 kids.
Flipping over to the defensive side of the ball, only one on-field position coach departure, and that was Alex Grinch going to take the coordinator position down at UCF. Jack Cooper takes over for him. Former defensive coordinator at FCS Rhode Island, has been also an assistant on the staff, and he is another young, relatively young guy, promising coach. John, how do you think he will do in his first season at the FBS or the Power 5 level as a position coach?
He's a guy I think that, we could talk about a couple other guys after this too, kind of bet on himself, right? You have that coordinator experience. Now I'm willing to jump up a level, but not start over, but to begin from kind of ground zero again. So I like that path that he's taken. I like anyone with coordinator experience at the college level. So he's put in his time. Now he's, jumped up to that safety spot. It's going to be a little different than Reed because Wisconsin took 4 safeties in that 25 class. So he's not going to be tasked with maybe bringing in a large hole in this 26 class. But I think his biggest thing is, what can you do with that safety room? Because there's obviously some transition there. It helps you bring in Zachman, but you lose a guy like Wohler, who's, everything you want to say about Hunter Wohler, heart and soul of the team, and so on and so forth. But, from the early returns, it's been pretty strong on the recruiting front. And players, that have talked about him or put stuff on social media seem to really respect him as what he's done. So there's some familiarity there. So I like that. And just kind of, segueing to the next thing, you've seen now 2 guys maybe following a similar path as Jack Cooper did, in a guy like Blake Rowland, who has that coordinator experience on the offensive side of the ball. He's now betting on himself, coming in as an assistant wide receivers coach, and Scott Power too, who has coordinator experience. He's going to now not start over, but take a couple steps down and work his way back up the ladder to potentially work in the Power 2 conference, right? Big Ten and SEC. So maybe Jack Cooper kind of laid that groundwork, and you've seen guys now like Power and Rowland come and potentially follow a similar path at Wisconsin.
Another name added to the defensive side of the ball is Tuff Borland, who Recruitniks have known that name for a long time because he was a pretty heavily recruited prospect for Wisconsin. They didn't end up getting him, but he was someone they were interested in, whatever that was, 8 years ago or something, when he was coming out of high school. Now he's an assistant on the staff working with the linebackers. Again, another young guy. But I'm excited to see what he can bring, because he's someone I've always very much respected as a football player.
Yeah, he's from the make you feel old department, because I remember covering Tufts recruitment. And like you talked about, Matt, I mean, it felt like Wisconsin, and then Ohio State comes in and kind of says, nope.
Yeah, we've heard that story a couple times.
This will be going in a different direction. You talk about, a young guy with Borland, they've let him go out and recruit a bunch. He's been in some living rooms of some kids. So that kind of shows the trust that they have in him. I don't want to say he's a future star or he's a future this or that, but, allowing him to go out there and recruit and offer guys, I think that kind of shows the trust that they have in him. And, you look across the board now, and there's kind of 2 coaches at every position. I can't think that's a bad thing, right? So we'll have to see if it happens, or if what kind of results it has. But you got to like the efforts that they're putting to the on-field coaching, and you would imagine maybe the results are going to be a little bit stronger moving forward here. We'll see.
One last name, Joe Ludwig. Wisconsin fans are familiar with the name Ludwig. That's come across the board once or twice before, but I think that having another body, like you said, in every room, especially the tight ends room, which has been probably the most underperforming position group of the past 2 years, is really essential, especially when you're trying to develop some of these younger guys, whether it's a Grant Stack, a Jackson McGowan, guys like that. So our final edition here, John, what are your thoughts on the addition of Joe Ludwig?
Yeah, another from the make you feel old department. I remember kind of covering his recruitment. He wasn't a big blue chip guy, but certainly someone that was being recruited at that level. A lot of people brought up his dad. Is his dad available to maybe go in that senior analyst type role that I think Luke Fickell wanted Mike Vrabel to be in, and then Jack Del Rio drove that opportunity off the road, so to say. I don't know, maybe. But again, just another young guy that they're bringing in to bolster that on-field, development and, everything that kind of goes into that. And is this the year the tight end bounces back? I don't think it'll be Joe Ludwig related. It could be Tanakozio related, but, it certainly would help there.
A lot of young guys, like a lot of very, very young guys. And I think that is interesting because obviously Grimes, very veteran coach. On the defensive side of the ball, you've got Matt Mitchell, who's a very veteran coach, and Tress, who's, a veteran coach, but not a ton of experience. I guess Whitlow's been around, he's been around coaching for a minute, but there's still a lot of very, very young coaches on this staff. And I think that can go one of two ways. They can knock it out of the park, right? With all of the right energy, with all of the right sort of vim and vigor and whatever other adjectives you want to use. But I also think the lack of experience, especially going up against this schedule this year, could also be a real pain in the behind, and something that some of these guys may not know how to cope with and may not know how to deal with. Because, you look at a Jordan Reed, you look at a lot of these guys, they've never been in a pressure situation like this, especially with, I don't want to say Luke Fickell's coaching for his job, but it's probably one step away from that.
A season away. Yeah. Not to look too much big picture, but I do think that regardless of what happens this fall, I think he's going to go into that 26 season, but that'll be a make or break type year for him and McIntosh and everyone that's involved here. But, you look at the pairings, it's a lot of experience with a younger guy, or, look, a guy like Reed, young position coach, but then he's got goal in there with coordinator experience and lots of years of coaching experience there. So I do like the pairings. I certainly think that there's a lot of reasoning behind that, but there's a lot of youth on that staff, like you talked about, Matt, and like you said too, it could kind of go one of two ways. So I think that anytime you got a young guy jumping up a level, you expect them to bring that hunger and that passion, and that they're going to be able to bring it on the recruiting front. That's not to say old, experienced guys can't do that, but I think that's a lot what you anticipate bringing. So we'll see if it all works. There's certainly they're allocating resources there, and we'll have to see how that it unfolds on the field in 2025 here, which, spring camp right around the corner.
It is right around the corner, John. And I appreciate you taking the time out, as always, because you have plenty of things right around the corner yourself. Luckily, it's not quite as busy these days. Isn't like old school National Signing Day this week? I have no idea, because Wisconsin isn't signing any prospects this week, to the best of our knowledge. So it's a little bit weird to get into February in what, you and I grew up with as signing day, and to have it be just so quiet.
Yeah, we got like a notice of it, through Rivals, because there's some teams still doing a little bit of work right now, but yeah, that seems like archaic history now. That February, it's today. Today is the big signing day, February, and now everything's done, wrapped up, and Wisconsin's got 16 kids or 15 kids on campus already from that 25 class. So it's different. College football is different. Some I like, some I don't, but that's for another show.
That is for another show. So make sure you tune in for that and all of the episodes here of Badger Blitz TV. Subscribe, like, rate, review, all that good stuff. Make sure you are signed up to BadgerBlitz.com for all of the best Wisconsin message boards and information anywhere in the known universe. Until next time, he's John McNamara and I'm Matt Perkins, and we'll see you in the den.